The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under the merciless August sun, a vast expanse of red rocks and twisted Joshua trees that seemed to guard secrets older than civilization itself. Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she examined the geological survey map spread across the hood of their dusty Jeep. Behind her, the small team of explorers gathered their equipment: ropes, helmets, high-powered flashlights, and an array of cameras that would document what they hoped would be a significant speleological find. According to the satellite imaging, the cave system should be right beyond that ridge, Sarah said, pointing toward a jagged formation of sandstone that rose like a broken tooth against the brilliant blue sky. The indigenous Hopi people mentioned it in their oral histories, but no modern expedition has ever mapped it properly. Marcus Webb, a grizzled cave explorer with 30 years of experience, squinted at the formation. His weathered face told stories of 1,000 underground journeys, each one leaving its mark in the fine lines around his eyes. "The locals call it the Cave of Whispers," he said, his voice gravelly from years of breathing limestone dust. "They say it's a place where time doesn't flow right. Of course, every unexplored cave has legends attached to it." The third member of their party, 26-year-old photographer Jake Morrison, was already snapping pictures of the landscape, his expensive Canon clicking rhythmically. Fresh out of graduate school with a degree in photojournalism, Jake had convinced National Geographic to partially fund this expedition in exchange for exclusive rights to his photographs. This was his chance to make a name for himself, to capture something extraordinary that would launch his career into the stratosphere. They hiked for 2 hours through the punishing heat, navigating between boulders and around patches of prickly pear cactus. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they approached the ridge, and Sarah found herself grateful for Marcus's experience, as he found handholds and paths that would have eluded her completely. The cave entrance, when they finally reached it, was almost disappointingly mundane, a dark slash in the rock face, partially obscured by desert brush and fallen stones. "Well, this is it," Marcus announced, dropping his pack and beginning to unload the caving equipment. "Doesn't look like much, does it? But the most interesting caves never do." Sarah activated her geological scanner, a device that used ground-penetrating radar to map underground structures. The readings that appeared on the screen made her catch her breath. "Marcus, look at this. The cave system extends at least 3 miles underground, possibly more. There are chambers down there the size of football fields." Jake was already at the entrance, his camera raised, capturing the way the sunlight cut through the darkness at an angle. Through his viewfinder, he noticed something odd. The quality of the darkness inside the cave seemed different somehow, almost textured, as if the shadows had depth and weight. He dismissed it as a trick of the light and lowered his camera. They spent the next hour preparing for the descent. Marcus checked and double-checked every piece of safety equipment, his methodical approach born from decades of experience that had taught him to respect the underground. Sarah reviewed their communication protocol. They would maintain radio contact at all times, and if anyone felt uncomfortable or sensed danger, they would abort immediately. Jake packed his cameras with extra care, ensuring that each lens was protected and that he had enough memory cards to document whatever they might find. At precisely 2:47 p.m., they entered the cave. The temperature dropped immediately, a blessed relief from the desert heat. The entrance tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, the wall smooth and striated with mineral deposits that caught their flashlight beams and threw back colors: ochre, rust, deep burgundy. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the cave were much larger than it appeared. "The acoustics are odd," Sarah noted, her scientific mind automatically analyzing the sensory data. "Sound is bouncing back with unusual resonance patterns." They descended for 20 minutes, the tunnel occasionally branching but always rejoining the main passage. The air grew cooler and damper, carrying a mineral smell mixed with something else, something Sarah couldn't quite identify. It reminded her of ozone, the smell that lingers after lightning strikes. The tunnel opened suddenly into a massive chamber, and all 3 explorers stopped, their flashlight beams inadequate to illuminate the space fully. Marcus activated a powerful LED floodlight, and the cavern revealed itself in stages. Stalactites hung from a ceiling at least 100 feet above them, some as thick as ancient redwoods. Stalagmites rose from the floor like frozen fountains, but what captured their attention immediately was the center of the chamber. A perfectly circular pool of water sat in the exact middle of the cavern floor, perhaps 30 feet in diameter. The water was absolutely still, reflecting the cavern ceiling with mirror-like precision. Around the pool, Arranged in a careful circle were 7 stone pillars, each about 10 feet tall and covered in symbols that none of them recognized. "My God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is artificial. Someone built this." Marcus approached the pillars cautiously, running his fingers over the carved symbols. "These aren't Hopi," he said. "They're not like any Native American petroglyphs I've ever seen. The style is completely different, more geometric, almost mathematical." Jake was already photographing everything, his camera clicking rapidly as he moved around the pool, capturing the pillars from different angles. Through his viewfinder, he noticed something that made him pause. The symbols seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they were catching light from a source he couldn't see. He lowered the camera and looked at the pillars directly. They appeared normal, just ancient carved stone. But through the lens, that strange shimmer persisted. "Sarah, Marcus, look at this," he called out, showing them the images on his camera's display screen. The symbols looked different in the photographs. Sarah examined the screen, her scientific skepticism warring with what she was seeing. "It could be some kind of phosphorescence in the rock, reacting to the camera flash," she suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus had moved to the edge of the pool and was kneeling, peering into the water. "This is strange," he said. "The water should be moving, even slightly from air currents or thermal variations. But it's completely still, like glass." Jake moved to photograph the pool, positioning himself between 2 of the pillars to get the best angle. He raised his camera, framed the shot, and pressed the shutter button. The flash fired, illuminating the cavern in a brief, brilliant burst of light. And in that instant, everything changed. The water's surface rippled, though no one had touched it. The ripples spread outward in perfect concentric circles, but instead of fading, they intensified, growing more pronounced. The surface of the pool began to glow with a soft blue-white light that pulsed in rhythm with some unheard heartbeat. The symbols on the pillars blazed to life, burning with the same otherworldly illumination. "What the hell did you do?" Marcus shouted, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him back from the pool. "I just took a picture," Jake protested, but his voice was drowned out by a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A deep, resonant hum that made their teeth ache and their bones vibrate. Sarah's geological scanner went haywire, the screen displaying readings that made no sense. Temporal distortions, gravitational anomalies, energy signatures that shouldn't exist. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "Now. Something's happening. Something we don't understand." But before they could move, the light from the pool intensified, becoming almost blinding. Jake, acting on instinct rather than thought, raised his camera and began shooting, the flash firing repeatedly as he captured the impossible phenomenon unfolding before them. Each photograph seemed to intensify the effect, the light growing brighter, the hum growing louder, and then as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The light faded, the hum ceased. The pool returned to its mirror-like stillness. The only sound was their ragged breathing echoing through the chamber. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Define okay," Marcus replied, checking his equipment with trembling hands. "What the hell was that?" Jake was staring at his camera's display screen, his face pale. "Guys," he said quietly, "you need to see this." Sarah and Marcus crowded around him, looking at the images he'd captured during the phenomenon. At first, they appeared normal, just photographs of the glowing pool and pillars. But as Jake scrolled through them, they began to show something else. The images changed, showing not the cave as it was, but something different. The first few photographs showed the chamber as they'd found it, but the subsequent images showed changes. In one, there were people in the cave, people wearing clothes that looked futuristic, made of materials that seemed to shift and change color. In another, the cave had been transformed into some kind of facility, with technology built into the walls, screens and displays, showing information in languages none of them could read. "This is impossible," Sarah said, but she couldn't look away from the images. "These have to be corrupted files, some kind of digital artifact." But Marcus was looking at one particular photograph, his expression troubled. "Sarah, look at the date stamp on this one." The image showed the cave chamber filled with what appeared to be scientific equipment, banks of computers and instruments surrounding the pool. In the background, partially visible, was a digital calendar display. The date it showed was February 17th, 2047, more than 20 years in the future. Jake continued scrolling through the images, each one showing a different scene, a different moment in time. There were photographs of the cave during what appeared to be different historical periods. Native Americans performing some kind of ceremony around the pool, Spanish conquistadors discovering the chamber with expressions of fear and wonder, prospectors from the Old West staring at the glowing water. And there were images from the future, not just the immediate future, but decades, perhaps centuries ahead. One showed the cave entrance on the surface, but the landscape around it had changed dramatically. Where there had been desert, there was now a sprawling city, buildings of glass and metal rising into a sky filled with vehicles that floated rather than flew. Another showed the chamber itself transformed into something like a museum, with holographic displays explaining its significance to visitors who looked distinctly not quite human, their proportions subtly wrong, their features too refined. "This isn't possible," Sarah repeated, but the evidence was literally in their hands. Cameras can't photograph the future. They can't photograph the past, not unless they're pointed at something that shows the past. This violates every principle of physics. Marcus was examining the pillars again, his flashlight beam playing over the symbols. "Unless," he said slowly, "this place somehow exists outside normal time. The legends say time doesn't flow right here. What if they weren't being metaphorical? What if this pool, these pillars, somehow exist at all points in time simultaneously?" "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, but her protest was automatic, lacking conviction. She was a scientist, trained to evaluate evidence objectively, and the evidence before her was undeniable, no matter how impossible it seemed. Jake had gone quiet, scrolling through the photographs with an expression of intense concentration. "There's something else," he said. "Look at this one." The image he displayed showed the cave chamber as they were seeing it now. The still pool, the 7 pillars, the stalactites hanging from the ceiling. But there were figures in the photograph, 3 people standing exactly where Sarah, Marcus, and Jake were standing at this moment. The resolution was incredible, far beyond what Jake's camera should have been capable of capturing. And as they looked closer, they realized with a shock of recognition that the 3 figures were them, Sarah, Marcus, and Jake, photographed in this exact moment, but from an angle that was impossible because none of them had been standing there to take the picture. "When did you take this?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I didn't," Jake replied. "I mean, I took the picture, but I was photographing the pool. I wasn't pointing the camera at us." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. "The camera isn't just capturing images from different times," she said slowly, working through the implications. "It's capturing images from different perspectives, different points in space as well as time. It's as if the camera, when activated in this chamber, can see through some kind of dimensional membrane." They stood in silence for a long moment, each of them trying to process what they'd discovered. Finally, Marcus spoke. "We need to document this carefully. Take samples, measurements, more photographs. But we also need to be extremely careful. We don't understand what we're dealing with here." Over the next hour, they worked methodically, Sarah taking geological samples and readings while Marcus mapped the chamber and examined the pillars more closely. Jake continued photographing, but now with more caution, aware that each photograph might be capturing something far beyond what was immediately visible. The more they explored, the stranger things became. Sarah's instruments detected energy signatures that shouldn't exist, quantum fluctuations on a macro scale, gravitational anomalies that suggested the pool was somehow heavier than its volume should allow, temporal distortions that made precise measurements impossible. Marcus discovered that the symbols on the pillars weren't just carved into the stone, they were part of the stone, as if they'd grown there naturally, following mathematical patterns that felt both alien and oddly familiar. And Jake's camera continued to capture impossible images. Photographs of the pillars showed them at different heights, as if they'd grown or shrunk over time. Images of the pool revealed it at varying levels, sometimes full to the brim, sometimes nearly empty. And scattered throughout were images of people, some they recognized from history books, others completely unknown, all of them standing in this chamber, all of them looking at the pool with expressions ranging from reverence to fear. "We need to show these to someone," Jake said, scrolling through what must have been hundreds of photographs by now. "Scientists, physicists, someone who can explain what's happening." "Who would believe us?" Sarah countered. "Without seeing this place in person, without experiencing it themselves, anyone we showed these images to would assume they were faked. We'd be laughed out of every institution in the country." Marcus was standing at the pool's edge again, staring into the perfectly still water. "There's something down there," he said suddenly, "deep in the pool, something reflecting the light differently." Sarah joined him, leaning carefully over the water. At first, she saw only their reflections, mirror perfect on the glassy surface. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized Marcus was right. Far below the surface, perhaps 30 or 40 feet down, there was something, a shape, geometric and precise, that seemed to pulse with the same blue-white light they'd seen earlier. "It looks artificial," she said. "Some kind of structure or device." "We should send down a camera," Jake suggested. "Get a closer look." Marcus shook his head. "Too risky. We don't know how deep that pool goes or what touching the water might trigger. We've already activated something once today. I'm not eager to do it again." But even as he spoke, the water began to ripple again, though no one had touched it. The ripples spread from the center and the light began to build once more, that strange blue-white glow intensifying with each passing second. The hum returned, that bone-deep vibration that seemed to resonate with something fundamental in the universe itself. "We need to leave," Sarah shouted over the increasing noise. "Now!" They grabbed their equipment and ran for the entrance tunnel, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they climbed back toward the surface. Behind them, the light grew brighter, spilling out of the chamber and chasing them up the passage. The hum became a roar, and the walls of the tunnel began to shake, small rocks and dust raining down from the ceiling. They burst out of the cave entrance into the late afternoon sunlight, stumbling and gasping for breath. Behind them, light blazed from the cave mouth, so bright it hurt to look at directly. And then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. The light faded. The roar diminished to silence. The cave returned to its deceptive normality, just a dark opening in the Arizona rock face. For a long moment, they simply sat there on the hot stone, catching their breath and trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Jake checked his camera, scrolling through the images he'd captured during their flight from the cave. "Oh no," he said softly. "What?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Jake turned the camera screen toward them. The last photograph he'd taken, captured just as they'd reached the cave entrance, showed the chamber behind them. But it wasn't empty. Standing around the pool, looking directly at the camera, looking directly at them, were dozens of figures. Some wore ancient clothing. Others wore nothing they recognized. Some appeared human, others distinctly less so. And all of them were watching, their expressions unreadable across the gulf of time and space that the camera had somehow bridged. "What have we found?" Marcus whispered. None of them had an answer. They packed their equipment in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, already knowing that their lives had fundamentally changed the moment they'd entered that cave. They had discovered something impossible, something that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality, time, and existence itself. As they hiked back to their jeep, none of them noticed the figure watching them from a distant ridge, a tall woman in clothes that shimmered and shifted in the sunlight, her face hidden behind a helmet of dark glass. She watched until they drove away, then turned and walked back toward the cave, her footsteps leaving no traces in the desert sand. 3 days had passed since their emergence from the cave, and the team had retreated to a small motel in Flagstaff to examine their findings in detail. Sarah had commandeered one room as a makeshift laboratory, her geological equipment spread across every available surface. Marcus occupied another, his detailed maps and notes covering the walls like the obsessive work of a conspiracy theorist. And Jake had converted the third room into a dark room of sorts, though in the digital age. This meant multiple computers and monitors displaying and analyzing the hundreds of photographs he'd captured. They worked in a state of exhausted fascination, sleeping in brief, fitful intervals and sustaining themselves on coffee and takeout food. Sarah had called in sick to her university position. Marcus had postponed 2 other expeditions, and Jake had stopped responding to messages from National Geographic's editors, who were growing increasingly impatient for the story they'd funded. "You need to see this," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the edge of excitement mixed with fear that had become familiar over the past 72 hours. Marcus and Jake crowded into her room, finding her hunched over her laptop, where complex graphs and data streams scrolled across the screen. The geological samples she'd collected from the cave were arranged on a makeshift examination table, rocks that looked ordinary enough to the untrained eye but which, according to Sarah's instruments, were anything but. "I've been analyzing the mineral composition of the samples," she explained, pulling up a 3-dimensional molecular model on the screen. "And I'm finding isotopes that shouldn't exist, elements with decay rates that violate everything we know about nuclear physics. Some of these samples show isotope ratios that suggest they're simultaneously billions of years old and brand new, as if they exist at multiple points in their own timeline at once. Marcus leaned closer, examining one of the rock samples through a magnifying lens. That's impossible. I know, Sarah said, her voice taking on a slightly hysterical edge. Don't you think I know that? I've triple-checked my equipment, run the tests a dozen times. The results are consistent. These rocks are temporally unstable. They exist in a quantum superposition of ages oscillating between different states. Jake had been quiet, but now he spoke up. Like Schrödinger's cat, but with rocks instead of a cat. Exactly like that, Sarah confirmed. And there's something else. I detected traces of element 115, moscovium, in concentrations that shouldn't be possible naturally. Moscovium is synthetic, created in particle accelerators, and highly unstable. But the moscovium in these samples appears to be stable, as if it's being held in place by some kind of external field. What does moscovium do? Marcus asked. Sarah pulled up another screen, this one showing theoretical physics papers. According to some fringe theories, stable moscovium could be used to create localized distortions in spacetime, essentially, to manipulate gravity and time on a small scale. Bob Lazar claimed it was used in UFO propulsion systems, but that's never been verified and is generally considered pseudoscience. Until now, Jake said quietly. The implications hung heavy in the air. They weren't just dealing with a strange cave or unusual photographs. They had stumbled onto something that suggested advanced technology, something that operated on principles far beyond current human understanding. Jake returned to his room and pulled up a specific set of photographs on his largest monitor. I've been analyzing the images chronologically, or at least what appears to be chronologically based on the content, he explained, as the others joined him. And I'm finding a pattern. He displayed a series of images in sequence. The first showed the cave chamber empty except for the pool and pillars, the stone looking ancient and weathered. The next showed Native Americans in the chamber, performing what appeared to be a ritual, smoke rising from fires that left no visible marks on the stone. Then Spanish conquistadors, their armor gleaming in torchlight, one of them reaching toward the pool with an expression of desperate hunger. These images appear to be in historical order, Jake continued. But then we get to these. The images shifted to more recent times, or at least, times that looked recent. There were photographs showing the chamber filled with modern scientific equipment, similar to what Sarah had brought but far more advanced. Men and women in hazmat suits operated strange devices around the pool, taking measurements and samples. The date stamps visible in some of the images ranged from 2031 to 2045. Now here's where it gets really interesting, Jake said, pulling up another set of images. These showed the chamber transformed into something else entirely. The natural cave had been extensively modified, the walls reinforced with some kind of metallic material that seemed to flow like liquid but maintained rigid structure. The pool was contained within a complex apparatus of rings and crystalline structures, all of it pulsing with that same blue-white light they'd witnessed. But what captured their attention were the people in these images. They wore uniforms of a style none of them recognized, made from materials that appeared to shift color subtly as they moved. Their faces showed a mixture of ethnicities that seemed to blend together in ways that suggested extensive genetic mixing over many generations. And they were working with technology that looked simultaneously advanced and organic, as if machines and living tissue had been merged into something new. When do you think these are from? Marcus asked. Jake pointed to a date stamp visible on one of the screens in the photograph. If we believe this, these images are from 2089, 64 years from now. Sarah sank into a chair, her scientific worldview buckling under the weight of impossible evidence. This can't be real. Time travel doesn't exist. The paradoxes alone would make it impossible. Maybe not time travel, Marcus suggested, his tone thoughtful. What if it's more like temporal observation? What if that pool, those pillars, somehow create a window into other times? A place where past, present, and future can all be seen simultaneously. But Jake's camera captured these images, Sarah protested. That means the camera itself was somehow affected by whatever field exists in that chamber. Light doesn't travel through time. It can't capture images of things that haven't happened yet. Jake had been quiet, scrolling through more images. Unless, he said slowly, the images aren't traveling through time. What if the camera is acting as a kind of receiver, picking up quantum information that exists in a state of temporal superposition? What if all moments in time exist simultaneously? And that cave is just a place where the barriers between those moments are thin enough to perceive. It was a wild theory, the kind of thing that would get laughed out of any serious scientific venue. But sitting in that motel room, surrounded by evidence that defied conventional explanation, it didn't seem nearly as crazy as it should have. Marcus stood and began pacing, a habit of his when thinking through complex problems. Let's approach this logically. We have 3 pieces of evidence. 1. The cave chamber with its pool and pillars. 2. The unusual mineral composition of the rocks, suggesting temporal instability. 3. Photographs that appear to show past and future events. What's the simplest explanation that accounts for all 3? There isn't a simple explanation, Sarah said flatly. Any explanation requires us to throw out major portions of established physics. Then maybe, Jake suggested, our understanding of physics is incomplete. Maybe there are phenomena we haven't discovered yet, principles we don't understand. The people in these future photographs, they seem to know what they're dealing with. They've built technology around it. Maybe we're just the primitive ancestors stumbling onto something we're not ready to comprehend. Sarah stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the Flagstaff streets without really seeing them. If we're right, if any of this is real, then we have to decide what to do about it. Do we go public? Contact the government? Try to keep it secret? Going public without more evidence would destroy our credibility, Marcus said. We'd be labeled as crackpots. But keeping it secret feels wrong, too. If this is real, if there's technology or knowledge to be gained from that place, it could change everything. And if we contact the government, Jake added darkly, there's a good chance we'd never see the outside of an interrogation room again. Places like that tend to attract the kind of attention we probably don't want. They fell silent, each considering the weight of the decision before them. Finally, Sarah turned back from the window. We need more information. We need to go back to the cave, but this time better prepared. We need to document everything more thoroughly, take more samples, try to understand what we're dealing with before we decide what to do with that knowledge. Agreed, Marcus said. But we need to be smarter about it this time. No more triggering mysterious phenomena we don't understand. We go in, we observe, we document, we leave. Scientific method all the way. Jake nodded, already thinking about what additional camera equipment he might need. When do we go back? Tomorrow, Sarah decided. We use today to prepare, to rest, to review everything we know. Tomorrow we return to the cave and hopefully get some answers. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. That evening, as they sat in Marcus's room reviewing their plans, Jake's laptop chimed with an incoming email notification. He glanced at it absently, then froze, his face going pale. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing his reaction. Jake turned the laptop to show them. The email was from an address he didn't recognize, just a string of random characters followed by a generic domain. The subject line read, "Regarding your discovery in Arizona." The body of the email contained only an attachment and a single sentence. You need to see this before you go back. Don't open it, Marcus warned. It's probably malware or a phishing attempt. But Sarah was reading over Jake's shoulder, her expression troubled. How would anyone know about our discovery? We haven't told anyone. We've been completely isolated for 3 days. Jake's finger hovered over the trackpad. Against his better judgment, against every internet safety protocol he'd ever learned, he opened the attachment. It was a photograph. More specifically, it was one of Jake's photographs, one he'd taken in the cave. But it had been annotated with arrows and text overlaid on the image, pointing out details they'd missed. The annotations were in English, but the phrasing was odd, formal in a way that suggested someone for whom English wasn't a first language, or someone from a very different time period. The photograph showed the chamber with the pool and pillars, but the annotations pointed to subtle details they hadn't noticed. One arrow indicated shadows on the cave floor that, when you looked closely, formed a pattern, not random but deliberately arranged to create symbols similar to those on the pillars. Another annotation highlighted what appeared to be a lens flare in the corner of the image, but the text beside it read, "Observer Signature, Temporal Echo from 2052 Observation Team." At the bottom of the annotated image was a message. The chamber responds to observation. Every photograph you take creates a quantum entanglement between your timeline and others. You have already been noticed. Return tomorrow as planned, but be aware you will not be alone. We will make contact. Come alone. Trust no one else with this information. The future of your species depends on what happens in the next 48 hours. The three of them stared at the screen in stunned silence. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice carefully controlled. This could be a hoax. Someone could have hacked Jake's camera remotely, stolen the images. How would they know we were planning to go back tomorrow? Sarah countered. We only decided that an hour ago, and we haven't communicated it to anyone outside this room. Our phones are off. Jake's laptop hasn't been connected to any networks. Jake checked his computer's connection history. She's right. I've been completely offline since we got back from the cave. I've been paranoid about security, so I disconnected from everything. Then how? Marcus began, but Sarah interrupted him. The only way someone could know our plans is if they observed us making them. And given what we've discovered in that cave, I can think of one very disturbing way someone could observe us across time. The implications sank in slowly. If the cave really did create some kind of bridge between different time periods, then it was theoretically possible for someone in the future to observe them now, to know their plans before they executed them. But that raised even more disturbing questions about causality, free will, and the nature of time itself. So what do we do? Jake asked. Do we trust this message? Do we still go back tomorrow? Marcus was examining the annotated photograph closely. Look at this observer signature they mentioned. This lens flare that they claim is from a 2052 observation team. If we enhance the image, he pulled out his own laptop and loaded the original unannotated version of the same photograph. Using photo editing software, he isolated and enhanced the area where the mysterious email claimed there was an observer signature. What appeared at first to be a simple lens flare resolved when enhanced into something far stranger, a ghostly image of figures in strange suits, standing in the chamber but somehow not quite solid, as if they were projected rather than physically present. This was in the original image, Marcus said, his voice tight. Before we received this email, they're not telling us something we don't have evidence for. They're pointing out something that was already there, something we missed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Which means whoever sent this email is either someone who has access to our files and sophisticated photo analysis software or they're exactly who they claim to be, Jake finished. Someone from the future who observed us taking these photographs and is now trying to communicate with us. They sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Finally, Sarah made a decision. We go back tomorrow. We follow the plan. But we're careful, more careful than we've ever been. We document everything, we stay alert, and if whoever sent this email wants to make contact, we'll see what they have to say. But we don't take anything at face value, and we don't trust anyone completely. Not even each other? Marcus asked, only half joking. Especially not each other, Sarah replied seriously. If this is real, if we're really dealing with temporal manipulation and observers from the future, then we can't assume anything is what it seems. Any one of us could be compromised, influenced, or replaced without the others knowing. It was a paranoid way to think, but given the circumstances, paranoia seemed like the only rational response. That night, none of them slept well. Jake lay in his motel bed, scrolling through the photographs on his camera for the 100th time, searching for other details they might have missed, other evidence of observers from different times. Sarah pored over her geological data, trying to find some conventional explanation for the anomalies she'd detected, some way to make sense of the impossible evidence before her. And Marcus sat with his maps and notes, trying to reconcile the strange legends surrounding the cave with the reality they'd discovered. At precisely 3:33 a.m., all three of their laptops chimed simultaneously with new email notifications. They each opened their devices to find identical messages from the same mysterious sender. Tomorrow, 2:47 p.m., same time you entered before. Synchronicity is important. The alignment must be maintained. Do not be late. The window is narrow. None of them could have explained how they knew, but they were all certain that tomorrow would change everything, not just for them, but potentially for all of humanity. They had stumbled onto something vast, something that connected past, present, and future in ways that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. And somewhere in the darkness of that Arizona night, in a cave that existed at all times and no time simultaneously, the pool stirred with internal currents that followed no natural law, and the pillars hummed with frequencies that resonated across the centuries, calling out to those who would listen, those who would dare to bridge the gaps between what was, what is, and what would be. The drive back to the cave site felt longer than it had 3 days earlier, though the distance was exactly the same. Sarah navigated the Jeep along the rough desert roads, while Marcus checked and rechecked their equipment, and Jake sat in the back seat, camera in hand, taking photographs of the landscape that now seemed somehow different, charged with potential significance that hadn't been apparent before. They arrived at the site at 1:30 p.m., giving themselves over an hour to prepare before the designated time of 2:47. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, but none of them suggested waiting in the shade. Instead, they methodically unpacked their gear, laying out equipment in careful arrangements that spoke to their shared nervousness. Sarah had brought twice as much geological equipment as the first trip, including sensors that could detect quantum fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, and electromagnetic field variations. Marcus had multiple redundant communication systems, determined that this time they would maintain contact with the surface no matter what happened in the cave. And Jake had brought not one but 3 cameras, each set to different specifications, hoping to capture whatever phenomena might occur from multiple perspectives. "We're treating this like a scientific expedition to another planet," Marcus observed as they geared up, "which I suppose in a way it is. A planet where the physics work differently." Sarah consulted her watch. 2:15 p.m. 32 minutes. "We should start our descent now if we want to be in the chamber by 2:47. They entered the cave in silence, their flashlights cutting through darkness that seemed deeper than it had before, more substantial. The descent down the entrance tunnel felt different this time. The walls seemed to pulse subtly with their own internal rhythm, and the temperature dropped more rapidly than thermodynamics should have allowed. Sarah's instruments were already picking up anomalies, quantum fluctuations that spiked as they moved deeper into the cave system. "The readings are off the charts," she reported, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Whatever field exists in this place, it's much stronger today than it was during our first visit." "Could that be because we're approaching the designated time?" Jake suggested, filming their descent with a handheld camera. "Maybe the temporal alignment the email mentioned, maybe it creates stronger effects." They reached the main chamber at 2:44 p.m., 3 minutes early. The space looked exactly as they'd left it, the pool mirror still in the center, the 7 pillars standing in their perfect circle, stalactites hanging from the ceiling like frozen lightning. But there was a tension in the air, a feeling of anticipation that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. Marcus set up his communication equipment while Sarah positioned her sensors around the perimeter of the pool. Jake moved between the pillars, photographing them from different angles, checking his images as he went. The symbols on the pillars seemed more distinct now, catching the light in ways that made them appear almost 3-dimensional. 2 minutes, Sarah announced, checking her watch. "Whatever's going to happen, it should start soon." They positioned themselves in the same spots they'd occupied during their first visit, unconsciously recreating the geometry of that initial encounter. Jake stood between 2 pillars, his camera raised and ready. Sarah stood near her sensor array, eyes fixed on the multiple screens displaying real-time data. Marcus held position near the entrance tunnel, ready to evacuate if necessary. At exactly 2:47 p.m., everything changed. The pool's surface rippled, though nothing had touched it. The ripples spread outward in perfect mathematical precision, and the water began to glow with that familiar blue-white light. The pillars hummed, their symbols blazing to life. But this time, the phenomenon was stronger, more controlled. The light didn't pulse chaotically. It built steadily, methodically, as if following some predetermined sequence. Sarah's instruments screamed with data, readings that defied every known physical law. The gravitational field in the chamber was fluctuating wildly, creating localized areas where time moved at different speeds. Her quantum sensors were detecting what appeared to be matter existing in superposition, objects that were simultaneously present and not present, occupying multiple states at once. And then the air above the pool shimmered, and shapes began to form. They weren't quite solid, not at first. They looked like projections, 3-dimensional images made of light and something else, something that seemed more real than mere photons. As Jake watched through his camera lens, capturing every second of the phenomenon, the shapes resolved into human forms, or mostly human anyway. There were 4 figures, standing on the surface of the pool as if it were solid ground. 3 appeared to be baseline human, wearing the same style of uniform they'd seen in the future photographs, clothing that seemed to shift colors subtly, adapting to the light and environment. But the 4th figure was different, taller, with proportions that were subtly wrong, features that suggested humanity but also something else, something evolved or engineered beyond the standard human template. One of the human figures, a woman with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that seemed to capture and reflect the blue-white light, raised her hand in what might have been a gesture of peace, or perhaps a command for attention. When she spoke, her voice had a strange quality, as if it were coming from multiple sources simultaneously, overlaid with echoes from different times. Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus Webb, Jake Morrison. She named them each in turn, and the sound of their names spoken by this impossible visitor sent chills through them. We apologize for the dramatic nature of this contact, but circumstances require direct communication. I am Dr. Amara Okonkwo, lead temporal researcher for the Global Chronology Preservation Initiative. The year in my native timeline is 2089. Sarah found her voice first, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. This is impossible. You can't be real. This has to be some kind of projection, a hologram. Not a hologram, Amara replied. What you're seeing is a quantum-entangled manifestation. Our consciousness and physical information projected backward through time using the natural properties of this location. We are real, Dr. Chen. As real as anything can be when spanning 64 years of temporal distance. Marcus had his recorder running, documenting every word. Why contact us? Why now? The tall, non-baseline human stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice was even stranger than Amara's, resonating with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in dimensions the human ear wasn't designed to perceive. Because you three are a critical junction point in the temporal causality web. Your discovery of this site and your decision about what to do with that knowledge creates a nexus, a branching of potential timelines. Some of those branches lead to futures we can work with, others lead to catastrophic outcomes. Catastrophic how? Jake asked, still filming, his journalistic instincts overriding his fear. The being that might have been human once gestured, and the air around them filled with images. Three-dimensional scenes playing out like movies but with a depth and reality that no cinema could match. They saw cities burning, not from conventional war but from weapons that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. They saw the Earth's surface scorched and lifeless, the sky a sick yellowish brown. They saw humanity reduced to scattered survivors hiding in underground bunkers, fighting over scraps of resources. This is one potential future, Amara explained, her voice heavy with sorrow. The timeline where knowledge of this place falls into the wrong hands too early, before humanity has developed the ethical and philosophical framework to use it responsibly. Nations fight over access to temporal technology. Wars are fought not just in space but in time, with catastrophic effects on the causality structure of reality itself. The devastating images faded, replaced by different scenes. These showed a world transformed but not destroyed, cities of incredible beauty, where nature and technology existed in harmony, humans working alongside beings like the tall figure with them, traveling among the stars, exploring not just the physical universe but the temporal dimensions that threaded through it. This is another potential future, the tall being said. The timeline where knowledge of this place is carefully managed, revealed to humanity gradually, with proper oversight and ethical consideration, where temporal technology is developed cooperatively, with respect for the delicate nature of causality, where humanity joins the broader community of temporally aware civilizations that exist throughout the cosmos. The images faded, and they were left in the cave chamber once more, facing these impossible visitors from a future that might or might not come to pass. Sarah's scientific mind was racing, trying to process the implications. You're saying that our actions, what we do with the knowledge of this place, will determine which future occurs? Not determine, Amara corrected. Influence. Causality is not simple linear progression. It's a complex web of probabilities and possibilities, where each choice creates branching timelines. Most individual choices have negligible effect on the macro-scale outcome, but some choices, made by some people at some times, have disproportionate impact. Your choice about what to do with this discovery is one of those critical junctures. Marcus was thinking tactically, evaluating the situation like the experienced explorer he was. How do we know you're telling the truth? How do we know you're not manipulating us for your own purposes? Maybe you come from one timeline and want to prune another timeline that you find threatening. The tall being made a sound that might have been laughter. An excellent question. The honest answer is that you cannot know with certainty. We could be lying. We could be manipulating you. That's the nature of temporal interaction. Trust becomes exponentially complicated when multiple timelines are involved. However, Amara interjected, We can offer evidence. Jake, examine the photographs you've taken since entering the chamber today. You'll find that they contain information you couldn't have known, details about our technology, our society, information that you can verify when it becomes public knowledge in your future. Jake lowered his camera and began scrolling through the images he'd captured. His eyes widened as he saw what she meant. The photographs didn't just show Amara and her companions as they appeared now. They showed them in multiple contexts, multiple locations. There were images of them in what appeared to be their native time, working in advanced laboratories. Images of the Earth from space, showing continental configurations subtly different from current maps, suggesting geological changes that had occurred over decades. And there were images that appeared to be documents, technical schematics, historical records, all captured in impossible clarity considering they should have been unreadable from this distance. "This is impossible," Jake whispered, but his protest was becoming routine, almost ritual by this point. Sarah was examining her sensor data, her scientific training reasserting itself despite the impossible situation. "Your manifestation here is creating measurable effects. The quantum entanglement you mentioned, I'm detecting what appears to be paired particles existing in two states simultaneously, linked across time rather than space. The energy requirements for what you're doing must be enormous." "They are," Amara confirmed. "In our time, this facility, yes, this cave has been developed into a proper research facility, requires the power output of a small fusion reactor to maintain stable temporal projections. We can only sustain this connection for approximately 23 minutes by your timeline before the energy costs become prohibitive." "Then we should use the time wisely," Marcus said. "What exactly do you want from us? What's the right choice you're hoping we'll make?" The four visitors exchanged glances and something passed between them, some form of communication faster than speech. Finally, Amara spoke. "We want you to do exactly what you've already planned. We want you to continue studying this place, documenting it, learning from it. But we want you to do it carefully, quietly, without attracting attention from government agencies or military organizations. Not yet. We want you to build a foundation of understanding first," the tall being continued. "Publish papers but focus on the geological and archaeological aspects initially. Draw interest from the academic community, from scientists and researchers who approach this with curiosity, rather than the desire to weaponize. Create a groundswell of public knowledge that makes it harder for any single entity to monopolize access to this site. You're asking us to manage the dissemination of potentially the most important discovery in human history," Sarah said slowly. "That's an enormous responsibility." "Yes," Amara agreed simply. "It is. But you're the ones who made the discovery. The responsibility is yours whether you accept it or not. The only question is whether you'll exercise that responsibility consciously and carefully, or whether you'll make a panicked decision that leads to one of the darker timeline branches." Jake had been quiet, processing everything, but now he spoke up. "The email you sent. You said the future of our species depends on what happens in the next 48 hours. What happens after that? 48 hours from when we first contacted you, other parties will become aware of your discovery," Amara explained. "We can see certain events in the timeline with high probability. In approximately 31 hours, a classified satellite will capture infrared imagery showing thermal anomalies at this location, the result of the energy releases that occurred during your initial visit. Those images will flag in automated analysis systems and trigger an investigation. You have that long to decide what your narrative will be, how you'll frame the discovery, what information you'll reveal, and what you'll withhold." The implications were staggering. Sarah, Marcus, and Jake exchanged glances. Years of working together allowing them to communicate without words. They were being asked to essentially conspire to control information that could transform human civilization or destroy it. "What about paradoxes?" Sarah asked, her physicist's mind grasping for familiar conceptual ground. "If you're from our future and you're influencing our decisions, doesn't that create temporal paradoxes? You shouldn't be able to exist if you change the timeline that led to your existence." The tall being made that not quite laughter sound again. "Paradoxes are a human concern. Based on your limited linear perception of time, the reality is more complex. Yes, by interacting with you, we influence the probability distribution of future timelines. But consciousness, awareness, exists outside the simple flow of causality. We maintain continuity even as the timelines shift around us. It's difficult to explain in terms your physics has language for. Try, Marcus challenged. Amara waved her hand, and the air between them filled with a complex three-dimensional diagram, lines and nodes interconnected in patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the human visual cortex wasn't designed to process that many dimensions at once. Imagine time not as a line but as a tree, constantly branching. Most branches are very similar to each other, quantum variations that make no practical difference, but some branches diverge significantly. We exist in one branch, you in another. By communicating across the branch point, we create entanglement between our branches. We don't cease to exist if you make different choices. We simply exist in a branch where we came from a timeline where you made the choices we recommend, while you might exist in a branch where you made different choices leading to different versions of us, or no versions at all. My head hurts, Jake muttered, lowering his camera briefly before raising it again, determined to capture every second of this impossible encounter. That's normal, Amara said with a slight smile. Temporal mechanics isn't intuitive. Even in our time, with 6 decades of research behind us, we're still discovering new principles. What's important for you to understand is that your choices matter. They create ripples that propagate forward through time, influencing which branches become more probable and which become less so. The light around the visitors was beginning to fluctuate, becoming less stable. Our time is almost up, the tall being said. The energy costs are mounting exponentially. We'll leave you with 3 things. First, coordinates. A small device materialized on the stone floor near Sarah's feet, looking like a cross between a hard drive and a crystal. This contains detailed information about temporal mechanics, as much as we could compress into a format your current technology can read. Study it carefully. Use it wisely. Second, Amara continued, a warning. There are others who have discovered this place before you, across different time periods. Not all of them have humanity's best interests at heart. Some come from timelines that evolved very differently from yours. Be cautious of anyone else who claims to be offering help or guidance. Verify everything. Trust your judgment. And third, the tall being said, its voice beginning to fragment and echo, becoming harder to understand. Remember that the future is not fixed. Every moment, every choice creates new possibilities. Don't feel paralyzed by the weight of responsibility. Make the best choices you can with the information available, and trust that human adaptability and ingenuity will find ways forward that even we, with our temporal perspective, cannot fully predict. The light intensified, becoming almost blinding. Sarah grabbed the device from the floor, feeling it vibrate in her hand with what felt like stored energy or information, too dense to be contained easily. Jake's cameras captured the final moments of the encounter, the visitors fragmenting into light and probability, their forms dissolving like reflections on disturbed water, and then they were gone. The light faded, the hum ceased. The pool returned to its mirror stillness. The chamber was exactly as it had been except for the 3 of them standing there in stunned silence, and the strange device in Sarah's hand. Did that really just happen? Jake asked, checking his cameras to make sure the footage was actually there, that he hadn't imagined the entire encounter. It happened, Marcus confirmed, his recorder still running, preserving every word that had been spoken. The question is, what do we do now? Sarah stared at the device in her hand, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the responsibility it represented. We do exactly what they suggested. We study, we document, we learn, and we're very, very careful about who we trust with what we discover. They spent the next hour conducting additional tests, taking more samples, documenting every detail of the chamber. Sarah's sensors had recorded the entire encounter, capturing data that would take months or years to fully analyze. Jake had hundreds of photographs, each potentially containing information about futures that might or might not come to pass. And Marcus had detailed notes and recordings that documented everything. As they prepared to leave the cave, Jake paused at the entrance to the chamber, looking back at the pool and pillars. We're going to come back here, aren't we? This isn't the end of our involvement with this place. No, Sarah agreed. This is just the beginning. We've been chosen, or we've chosen ourselves, to be the stewards of this discovery. That's not a responsibility that ends with one visit. They emerged from the cave into the late afternoon sunlight, the desert heat feeling almost welcoming after the temporal strangeness of the chamber. But as they hiked back to their jeep, none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by human eyes, but by the accumulated gaze of multiple timelines, multiple futures, all of them somehow aware of this critical moment where possibilities branched and diverged. The device Sarah carried felt heavier with each step, not because its physical mass increased, but because the implications of what it contained grew more profound the more she thought about them. Somewhere in that crystalline structure was knowledge that could transform human understanding of time, causality, and the nature of reality itself. The question was whether humanity was ready for that knowledge, and whether Sarah, Marcus, and Jake were the right people to make that determination. As they drove away from the site, the setting sun painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson, none of them noticed the figure standing on the ridge where they'd first spotted the cave entrance. Unlike the figure who had watched them before, this one wore no shimmering future clothing. Instead, they wore a dark suit that looked very much like something from the present day, and they held binoculars trained on the departing jeep. After a long moment, the figure lowered the binoculars and spoke into a radio. "Target team has emerged from the site. They're carrying something. Appears to be a technological device of unknown origin. Recommend immediate intercept." The response crackled back through static. "Negative. Continue observation only. Let them think they're making their own choices. We'll move when the time is right." The figure watched until the jeep disappeared into the distance, then turned and walked to where a helicopter sat hidden among the rocks, its military markings carefully obscured. The future, it seemed, wasn't the only thing that had taken an interest in what was happening in that Arizona cave. The safe house was a modest cabin in the mountains outside Flagstaff, rented under a false name with cash Marcus had withdrawn in small increments from different ATMs across 3 states. They'd learned paranoia quickly over the past week, implementing security measures that would have seemed absurd before their encounter in the cave, but now felt barely adequate. Sarah had the device from the future spread across a makeshift workstation, connected to her laptop through a series of adapters that seemed simultaneously too primitive and impossibly sophisticated for the task. The crystalline structure interfaced with standard USB ports, but the data transfer protocols were unlike anything in contemporary computing. It had taken her 3 days just to develop software that could begin to interpret the information encoded within. "It's not storing data the way our systems do," she explained to Marcus and Jake as they gathered around her workstation. "It's using something like quantum entanglement to encode information in multiple states simultaneously. One piece of data can contain multiple layers of meaning depending on how it's observed. It's elegant and terrifying." Jake had been working on analyzing the photographs from their second visit, cross-referencing images that showed the future with historical records, trying to establish which details could be verified and which remained speculative. "I've been cataloging everything," he said, displaying a spreadsheet that had grown to thousands of entries. Architectural styles in the future images, clothing designs, visible technology, even the body language and demographic patterns of the people shown. It's all consistent with a specific extrapolation of current trends, genetic mixing leading to more homogeneous ethnic characteristics, material science advancing toward programmable matter, social structures showing signs of global integration. "Which proves nothing," Marcus interjected. "Consistency isn't the same as accuracy. Someone from our time could have created very convincing fake images of a plausible future, except for the elements that reference technology we don't have yet," Sarah countered, pulling up data from the device. "I've been reading the technical documents stored in this thing, and they describe principles of physics that we haven't discovered. Not wild speculation or science fiction, rigorous mathematical frameworks that extend our current understanding in directions we haven't explored. Someone would need to be a theoretical physicist, decades ahead of the field to fake this." She displayed a section of equations on her screen, complex integrals and operators that seemed to describe spacetime in ways that went beyond Einstein's relativity. "This right here, this is a mathematical framework for describing closed time-like curves in a way that avoids paradoxes. It's based on work that some contemporary physicists have published, but it extends the concepts in ways that are completely novel. I've been trying to work through the proofs, and as far as I can tell, they're valid. This could actually work. Could we build a time machine with this information?" Jake asked, the journalist in him already thinking about the implications. "Not with current technology," Sarah said. "The energy requirements are astronomical. You'd need a power source equivalent to a large fusion reactor just to create a stable temporal field. But the principles are here. With enough time and resources, theoretically, yes, this could be the foundation for temporal technology." Marcus had been pacing, thinking through their situation strategically. We've been here for a week. We've analyzed the data. We've verified what we can verify. Now we need to make a decision. What do we do with this information? It was the question they'd been avoiding, the decision they'd been postponing while they buried themselves in analysis and documentation. Now it couldn't be avoided any longer. Sarah spoke first. Amara said we should build a foundation of understanding through academic channels, publish papers, attract scholarly interest, create public knowledge that prevents monopolization. I think we start there. I can write up a paper on the geological anomalies of the site, the temporal isotope irregularities, nothing about time travel or future visitors, just solid scientific anomalies that warrant further study. I can document the archaeological aspects, Marcus added, the pillars, the symbols, the evidence of previous human interaction with the site across multiple time periods. Frame it as an anthropological discovery. That gives us two separate academic threads that both point to the cave's importance without revealing the full truth. And I can release some of the photographs, Jake said thoughtfully. The ones showing past visitations, Native Americans, conquistadors, prospectors, historical images that could have been captured through some kind of unknown optical phenomenon. It builds public interest without exposing the time travel aspects. It was a plan, carefully constructed to reveal enough to establish their credibility, while concealing enough to prevent immediate military or government seizure of the site. They would be playing a long game, gradually building understanding and public awareness until the knowledge was too distributed to be suppressed. But before they could begin implementing the plan, Sarah's laptop chimed with an alert. Her face went pale as she read the notification. "We have a problem," she said quietly. "Someone just posted a thread on Reddit about strange photographs found in an Arizona cave. They're claiming they hiked to a location near where we were and found evidence of unusual activity. They've posted photographs." She turned the screen so the others could see. The Reddit thread was only 2 hours old, but it already had thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments. The photographs showed the outside of the cave entrance, boot prints in the desert sand, and most damningly, what appeared to be government vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows, parked near the site. "When were those taken?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. The timestamp on the images showed they were from yesterday morning while the three of them had been in the safe house analyzing data. Someone else had been to the cave in their absence. Someone with enough resources to deploy multiple vehicles and personnel. "We've been compromised," Jake said, scrolling through the Reddit comments. Many were dismissive, calling it a hoax or creative fiction, but others were taking it seriously, cross-referencing the location data embedded in the photographs, discussing the types of vehicles visible in the images. Sarah was already packing up her equipment. "We need to move. If the government is at the cave site, they'll be looking for us. They might already know where we are." "Where do we go?" Jake asked, but even as he spoke, he was gathering his cameras and hard drives, moving with the practiced efficiency they'd all developed over the past week of heightened paranoia. Marcus was thinking tactically. "We split up. We're more vulnerable together. One strike could take out all three of us and all our data. Sarah, you take the device and your analysis. Head west, maybe California. Find a university where you have contacts. Start working on academic publication from there. Jake, you go south. Arizona, New Mexico. You're a photographer. You can blend in with tourist populations. Work on getting some of the images published through photography channels." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "I'll stay here, establish a public presence. If they're looking for us, I'll give them someone to find. I'll claim ignorance, say we had a falling out after we couldn't agree on how to handle the discovery. I'll give them a target while you two work on implementing the plan." It was a good strategy. Divide and conquer in reverse, making them harder to suppress, harder to silence. But it also meant separating, possibly for a long time, possibly forever if things went wrong. "We need a way to communicate," Jake said. "Something secure that can't be intercepted." Sarah had anticipated this. She produced 3 small devices, each about the size of a thumb drive. "Quantum communicators," she said. "I built them using principles from the device data. They're entangled at the quantum level. Anything sent to one will be received by the others instantaneously, regardless of distance, and the transmission can't be intercepted because it doesn't travel through normal space. At least, that's the theory. I haven't tested them yet." "Now's as good a time as any," Marcus said, taking one of the devices and plugging it into his laptop. "How do they work?" Sarah demonstrated, typing a message on her laptop and sending it through the quantum communicator. Instantly, the The same message appeared on Marcus's and Jake's screens, with no detectable transmission delay, no signal that could be traced. Holy shit, Jake breathed. You just built working quantum communication devices from technology that won't be invented for decades. Working is a strong word, Sarah cautioned. They're functional but primitive. The bandwidth is limited, text only, and I'm not sure how long they'll maintain entanglement. But for basic communication, they should serve. They spent the next hour preparing for separation, dividing resources, making copies of critical data, and establishing protocols for staying in contact. It felt wrong, breaking up the team that had made the discovery together, but they all understood the necessity. At precisely 6:47 p.m., they'd started noticing that the number 47 kept appearing in significant moments, as if the universe were emphasizing the importance of their first entry into the cave at 2:47. They left the safe house, departing in 3 different directions. Sarah drove west on Interstate 40, watching the sun set behind the mountains ahead of her, the crystalline device from the future carefully packed in a lead-lined case that would, she hoped, shield it from detection. She had contacts at Berkeley who might help her, physicists she'd worked with during her graduate studies who would at least listen to her preliminary findings before dismissing them as impossible. Jake headed south on back roads, avoiding major highways, his multiple hard drives and cameras distributed across different bags and cases. He'd already identified several photography magazines and online platforms where he could begin releasing images, starting with the most innocuous and gradually building toward the more extraordinary. Marcus stayed behind just long enough to establish a digital trail, making online purchases and reservations that would suggest he was planning to stay in the area for several more weeks. Then he, too, left, heading northeast toward Colorado, where he had family who would shelter him if needed. For 3 days, nothing happened. They communicated through the quantum devices, brief messages confirming they were safe, sharing progress updates. Sarah had made contact with her Berkeley colleagues and was preparing an initial paper on temporal isotope anomalies. Jake had sold his first set of photographs to an online publication, images of the cave entrance and surrounding landscape that generated modest interest. Marcus had established himself in a small town in Colorado, letting it be known he was a cave explorer taking a sabbatical to write a book. Then, on the 4th day, everything fell apart. Sarah was the first to realize something was wrong. She'd been working in a coffee shop near the Berkeley campus analyzing data on her laptop when she noticed a man watching her from across the room. He wasn't trying to be subtle. He wanted her to know she was being observed. When she packed up to leave, he followed, maintaining a constant distance of about 20 feet. She messaged Marcus and Jake through the quantum communicator. "I've been made. One tail, possibly more. Not sure if government or private. Recommend you both implement contingency protocols." Jake responded first. "Same here. 2 people followed me from my hotel this morning. They're professional. I almost didn't spot them." Marcus's response was more concerning. "Men in suits came to my location an hour ago, said they were FBI, wanted to ask questions about our Arizona expedition. I refused without a lawyer present. They left but are still watching the building. They were all being monitored, all 3 of them simultaneously despite being in different states. Someone had resources and coordination sufficient to track them down and deploy surveillance teams across multiple locations. This wasn't random. This was organized and deliberate." Sarah made a decision. She couldn't risk leading her watchers to her Berkeley contacts, couldn't compromise them by association. She needed to go dark, completely off-grid. She pulled her car into a parking garage, disabled her phone's GPS, and sent one final message through the quantum communicator. "Going dark. We'll check in when secure. Be safe." Then she removed the quantum communicator, wrapped it in aluminum foil to block any possible tracking signals, and walked away from her car, leaving behind everything that could be traced. She still had the crystalline device in a backpack, along with a laptop loaded with copies of her research. Everything else was expendable. Jake made a similar decision, abandoning his hotel and his car, taking only what he could carry. The photographs were backed up in multiple cloud storage locations under different identities, and he'd already released enough images to make complete suppression impossible. Now he just needed to stay free long enough to release more, to build public awareness to the point where military control of the site became politically unfeasible. Marcus, with his watchers most openly present, chose a different approach. He walked out of his building and directly approached the men watching from a parked car. "I know who you are," he said through the car window. and I know what you want. Let's talk." The men exchanged glances. Then the driver nodded. "Get in." Marcus climbed into the back seat, acutely aware he was potentially making a terrible mistake. But he'd dealt with government officials before, and he understood how bureaucracies worked. Sometimes the best defense was direct engagement. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, eventually pulling into an underground parking structure beneath an office building that bore no identifying marks. Marcus was led to an elevator, taken to the 3rd floor, and escorted into a conference room where a woman in her 50s waited, sitting calmly at a table with several file folders arranged in front of her. "Mr. Webb," she said, gesturing to a chair, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I'm Deputy Director Catherine Torres, Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Division. We need to discuss what you found in Arizona." Marcus sat but said nothing, letting her make the first move. Torres opened one of the folders, displaying surveillance photographs of Marcus, Sarah, and Jake entering and exiting the cave. "We've been monitoring the site for 6 days, since our satellites detected unusual thermal and electromagnetic signatures. We know you've visited twice. We know you removed samples and possibly other materials. We know you've been conducting analysis on whatever you found there." She closed the folder and looked directly at him. "What I don't know, what my superiors are very interested in learning, is what exactly you discovered that warranted such elaborate security measures and coordinated information control. The Reddit post was sloppy work by one of our younger analysts, by the way. It's been removed and the user's account has been suspended, but it told us you were aware of our presence and taking countermeasures." Marcus considered his options. He could refuse to cooperate, demand a lawyer, play the outraged citizen card, but Torres seemed intelligent enough to recognize bullshit, and he suspected that approach would just escalate the situation. Instead, he decided to try something riskier, a version of the truth. "We found evidence of temporal anomalies," he said carefully. "The cave contains what appears to be a naturally occurring phenomenon that creates distortions in spacetime. We've documented unusual geological features, photographed what might be evidence of temporal displacement effects, and collected samples showing isotope ratios that shouldn't exist according to standard physics." Torres's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw interest flicker in her eyes. "Temporal anomalies. You're claiming you found a time travel device." "Not a device," Marcus corrected. "A location where natural conditions create temporal effects. We don't fully understand it. We're not even sure our interpretation is correct. It's possible there's a conventional explanation we haven't identified. That's why we wanted to approach it through academic channels, get peer review, bring in experts from multiple fields." "And the device your colleague Dr. Chen was carrying when she left your safe house yesterday?" Torres asked. "That didn't come from the cave?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. They knew about the crystalline device from the future, which meant their surveillance had been more comprehensive than he'd realized. Torres saw his reaction and nodded. "We've been watching all 3 of you since 2 hours after you emerged from your second cave visit. We have very good satellite coverage of that region, Mr. Webb. We saw Dr. Chen carrying something she didn't have when she entered, an object approximately 6 inches long, crystalline structure, emitting low-level radiation in the terahertz range. That object is of extreme interest to us." She leaned forward, her casual demeanor dropping away to reveal the steel underneath. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Webb. That cave represents a potential national security asset of unprecedented significance. If what you're claiming is true, if there are genuine temporal phenomena occurring there, then it needs to be studied and controlled by people with the resources and security clearance to handle it responsibly. 3 independent civilians running around with potentially dangerous technology and sensitive information is unacceptable. We're not trying to weaponize anything," Marcus protested. "We're scientists and explorers, trying to understand something remarkable. Putting it under military control guarantees it becomes a weapon, and leaving it unsecured guarantees it falls into the hands of foreign adversaries, terrorist organizations, or corporate interests that will absolutely weaponize it," Torres countered. "You seem like reasonable people, Mr. Webb. Help us do this right. Bring your colleagues in, turn over your data and materials, and work with us under proper security protocols. You'll still be involved in the research. We need your expertise. But it needs to happen within a controlled framework." It was a reasonable offer, presented reasonably, and that was exactly what made it dangerous. Marcus had no doubt that once they were working with Torres's organization, they'd be completely controlled. their research directed toward whatever applications the military found most interesting, their discoveries classified and removed from public knowledge. I need to think about it, Marcus said. Talk with my colleagues. We didn't make this discovery to hand it over to the military, but I understand your concerns. Give us 48 hours to discuss it among ourselves. Torres regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. 48 hours. But understand, Mr. Webb, that timeline is a courtesy, not a negotiation. With or without your cooperation, we will secure the site and acquire the materials you've collected. I'd prefer to do this cooperatively, with you as willing participants. But I will do it regardless. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. My people will return you to your vehicle. Think carefully about your decision, and understand that if you attempt to go public with this before we've reached an agreement, I have the authority to classify the entire matter under national security grounds and compel your silence. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Marcus was escorted back to his car, his mind racing. He'd learned several critical things from the meeting. First, they definitely knew about the device from the future. Second, they'd been watching all three of them closely enough to track their movements and communications. Third, Torres seemed like a rational actor, not a caricature of military overreach which somehow made her more dangerous. As soon as he was alone, he activated the quantum communicator and sent a message to Sarah and Jake. Had direct contact with DoD. They know about the device. They know we've been coordinating. They're giving us 48 hours to cooperate voluntarily before forced acquisition. We need to accelerate the plan. Sarah's response came quickly. Understood. Preparing immediate publication of preliminary findings. We'll release data publicly before timeline expires. Jake's message was shorter. I'm releasing everything. All photographs, all documentation. Flooding multiple platforms simultaneously. Make it too big to suppress. Marcus typed back. Confirmed. Do it now. Once it's public, their leverage disappears. Over the next 6 hours, they executed what would later be called the most successful coordinated information release in scientific history. Sarah uploaded her complete analysis of the temporal isotope anomalies to multiple preprint servers, bypassing peer review to get the information into public domain immediately. She included mathematical frameworks derived from the future device, technical specifications, and detailed geological data. Jake released 2,000 photographs across dozens of platforms: Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, photography forums, news outlets. Images showing the cave, the pillars, the impossible pool. Photographs captured through temporal displacement showing past and future. Documentation of their encounters with visitors from 2089. Everything, all at once. Too much for any organization to suppress or contain. Marcus wrote a detailed narrative of their discoveries and posted it to multiple blogging platforms, science forums, and sent it directly to journalists at major publications. He included his credentials, testimonials from colleagues, enough credibility to ensure it wouldn't be immediately dismissed as a hoax. The internet, predictably, exploded. Within 12 hours, their story was trending on every major platform. Scientists were debating the legitimacy of Sarah's data. Photographers were analyzing Jake's images for signs of manipulation. Journalists were trying to verify Marcus's account. Conspiracy theorists were having a field day. And millions of ordinary people were suddenly aware that 3 explorers claimed to have found evidence of time travel in an Arizona cave. The military's 48-hour timeline became irrelevant. The knowledge was out, too distributed to suppress, too popular to disappear, and the public pressure that generated made any attempt at military seizure politically impossible. Within 24 hours of the information going public, 3 congressional committees had announced investigations demanding transparency and civilian oversight of any research involving the site. Torres called Marcus at hour 36. That was well played, Mr. Webb. Reckless and potentially dangerous, but effective. You've made military control impossible. That was the point, Marcus replied. This discovery is too important to be locked away in a classified facility. Humanity deserves to know. Perhaps, Torres conceded, but you've opened Pandora's box, and you have no idea what might come crawling out. There were reasons we wanted controlled research conditions. And there were reasons we refused them, Marcus countered. Time will tell who was right. The call ended, and Marcus sat back, feeling simultaneously victorious and terrified. They'd succeeded in their goal of preventing monopolization of the discovery, but Amara's warning echoed in his mind. Some timelines lead to catastrophic outcomes. Had they just created one of those timelines? Or prevented one? The only way to know would be to live forward and see. 3 months later, the Arizona cave had become the most studied and most protected site in human history. An international consortium of scientists had been granted access, working under strict protocols that prevented any single nation or organization from controlling the research. Sarah was part of the research team, her temporal physics expertise making her invaluable. Jake's photographs had made him famous and wealthy, with exclusive rights to document the ongoing research. And Marcus served as site coordinator, using his exploration experience to manage the complex logistics of supporting hundreds of researchers in a remote desert location. They'd achieved their goal. The knowledge was public, the research was international, and the potential for weaponization had been, if not eliminated, at least reduced by transparency and oversight. But questions remained. The most disturbing one came 3 months and 17 days after they'd gone public, when a team of researchers working late in the cave chamber witnessed the pool activate spontaneously, without any human trigger. The water glowed with that familiar blue-white light, and shapes formed above its surface. Not the relatively friendly visitors from 2089 that Sarah, Marcus, and Jake had encountered, but something else. The beings that manifested were barely humanoid, their forms angular and wrong, as if they came from a timeline where evolution had taken a very different path. They didn't speak, they simply observed, their presence creating temporal distortions so severe that everyone in the chamber experienced nausea and disorientation. And then they were gone, leaving behind only questions and a sense of profound unease. Sarah analyzed the data from the encounter, comparing it to their own experiences. They came from a different timeline than Amara and her team, she concluded. The energy signature was completely different. I think we might have created a beacon. By activating the pool, by bringing it to wider attention, we've somehow made this location visible to observers from multiple timelines. Is that bad? Jake asked, though the question felt almost rhetorical. I don't know, Sarah admitted. Amara warned us there were others who discovered this place, not all of them friendly. Maybe we've just invited them to make contact. Marcus stood at the entrance to the cave, looking out at the desert landscape that now included a small city of research facilities, security perimeters, and international monitoring stations. We made our choice, he said quietly. Now we live with the consequences. In the cave behind them, the pool remained mirror still, reflecting the ceiling, reflecting the past, reflecting the future. And somewhere in the web of timelines that branched and converged around that strange nexus point, other versions of themselves were making other choices, creating other futures, living out the quantum possibilities that existed in superposition until observation collapsed them into single realities. They had found evidence of time travel in an Arizona cave. They had returned with photographs from the future, and now, whether ready or not, humanity would have to grapple with what that meant, for physics, for philosophy, for the very nature of existence, and causality, and free will. The story had no ending, because it existed at all points in time simultaneously, branching and reconverging, observed and observing, both past and future at once. It was a story that would be told and retold across timelines, each version slightly different, each version true in its own way. And in that cave, in that pool that existed outside normal time, the reflection showed not just what was, but what might be. Infinite possibilities cascading forward and backward, the future writing the past as much as the past determined the future, all of it connected in ways that human consciousness was only beginning to comprehend. Sarah Chen, Marcus Webb, and Jake Morrison had opened a door that could never be closed. And through that door, the future, all possible futures, was watching, waiting, reaching back to shape the present that would give birth to it. The adventure, they realized, was only beginning.